welcome everybody. Thank you for joining me today for Feed My Sheep. With me, I have my friend as a guest, Mr. Mike Cheng, who is one of the elders at North Shore Baptist Church. Not Mr., he's a doctor. And my first question for you, Mike, is about that. Welcome, by the way, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Caleb. Good to be here.
And my first question for you in regards to our conversation today really is about what you saw in the front lines of this COVID outbreak. What was going on? What was your experience?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Caleb, I am not a doctor. I am a physician assistant. Just want to make that clear. But I do work in a hospital. And so initially, I would say the end of March and maybe the first week of April, hospitals were overwhelmed by sick patients. We saw a lot of people getting infected and infecting their families. We saw young patients have a lot of difficulty, which we were surprised about. So people in their 30s and 40s even being on ventilators. So that was something that was surprising to us. But by God's grace, things are getting significantly better. Hospitalized patients it's about 50% of the volume that it was. And by God's grace, we're doing our best to care for as many people as we possibly can.
And praise God. Well, I know that it was tough initially up front for you in particular, just to, with all the other medical staff just being overwhelmed and inundated with a lot of things you weren't used to. So thank you for serving in that way, and we're thankful for you. But I want to ask you more in regards to your ministry as a pastor today. I want to speak to you in regards to church membership. Church membership is such a big thing that I think many Christians kind of take for granted. Whatever their church does, they just assume is right, and they just kind of go with that. There are some churches that don't believe in church membership at all, like the Calvary Chapel movement. And then there are others that kind of have a loose idea of membership and some that are much more strict. And I want to just ask you, in general, is church membership biblical?
Yeah. And again, just to add to your comment before, Caleb, I think, many reasons why church membership is not taken seriously in the evangelical church today. I think, we live in an individualistic culture, an age of individualism. I think we live in a consumer culture. I think people suffer from commitment phobia. And so there's a lot of reasons why church membership is not important. And I think even the concept of church membership is even challenged now, especially during these times, right? These extreme times where we have a pandemic and we're not able to meet together. So the most common questions people ask is church membership biblical? I was actually asked that by someone who visited our church, who I have seen, I think, every Sunday for about 3 years. And I asked him, why are you not a member? And he said, it's just not biblical. It's a man-made thing. So my answer is this: church membership is taught in the Bible. Now, the phrase church membership is not in the Bible, but neither is the Trinity or the hypostatic union. We know these doctrines to be true because we take many verses. You don't have one explicit verse, but you take many verses and you kind of pull them together. You synthesize them, you analyze them, you put them together so you can come up so that you know that our God is a triune God. And that God is fully God and Jesus is fully God and fully man. So it's the same thing with church membership. I think the idea, the concept is taught in the Bible, despite the fact that you don't see one explicit verse.
What are some of those places that we would pull together to find that and to understand and recognize that membership is in the Bible? Where are some places we see it?
Yeah, so I like to think of it in three ways. I think church membership is described in the New Testament, it is implied in the New Testament, and it is assumed in the New Testament. So I'll address these three parts. So first part, for church membership, I believe is described, especially in the book of Acts. I think you see throughout the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts, that becoming a Christian meant being a part of a local church. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to find any individual in the New Testament, with perhaps the exception of the Ethiopian eunuch, where that person was not attached to a particular local body. One place to look for in Acts chapter 2, Peter preaches his famous sermon. 3,000 people get saved, they get baptized, and what they don't do is they don't go home. They don't disperse, but instead, in Acts 2, verse 42, it says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and the prayers. So they're essentially already doing what a local church does when they gather. And so their commitment to local gatherings is one way church membership is described. Another way, some people don't see this, is the use of lists. If you look at 1 Timothy 5, Paul gives Timothy some exhortations about what to do in terms of providing finance for widows in the community. Now, the church in Ephesus cannot financially support every single widow in Ephesus. And so what you see there is that Paul talks about those who were enrolled, or those, it's almost like as if there was a list going on so that you could tell which widows were committed to the church, which widows were eligible for this financial support, and which widows were not. So the evidence of having these lists in the New Testament is another way I think church membership is described. And I think another place you could look at that suggests church membership is just with letters of commendation. Romans 16, for example, you see Paul commending Phoebe, who is a servant at the church at Cenchrea. Well, church is commending Phoebe to the church at Rome. Well, why would you need to commend someone or write a letter of commendation if the church had no church membership, if everything was loosey-goosey, people were anonymous and independent, you could just go wherever you wanted to go. No one would know anybody, and you wouldn't have to commend anyone. So those are some areas I think church membership is described. Secondly, I think church membership is also implied. It's implied in our relationship with church leaders. Caleb, I know that you are, so you're a pastor of a church out in Long Island. You know who's a member of your church, and you know who's not a member of your church. And Hebrews 13:17 commands Christians to submit to your leaders, to obey them, because they're keeping watch over your souls as those who have to give an account. And I think the question you have to ask is, well, which as a congregant, which pastor am I to submit to? I cannot submit to every pastor in the world. And Caleb, as a pastor, and for me as a pastor, which congregants, which Christians do we have to give an account for one day, right? We don't have to give an account for every single Christian in the world or every single Christian in New York, for example. And so verses like that assume that you have a specific relationship, that Christians have a specific relationship with a specific group of leaders, and these specific group of leaders have a specific relationship with specific Christians. We know who we have to give an account for. And lastly, I think church membership is also assumed in the major passages in the Bible about church discipline. If you look at Matthew 18 and 1 Corinthians 5, Jesus says, well, if a person does not repent, at some point you have to tell it to the church. I think Jesus is talking about the local church where that person is a member. It would not make sense for Jesus to say, tell it to the universal church. Tell that person's sin to every single Christian in the world. 1 Corinthians 5 is even more explicit, where Paul says, what do I have to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church that you have to judge? And so here we have, a distinction between those who are in the church, those who are committed to the church, and those who are outside of the church. I think that's church discipline. So if you don't have church membership, you can't exercise church discipline. So those are some areas I see church membership in the Bible.
I think I would agree with you 100%. And the one place where I may add to what you said, which I know that you just kind of would agree with, but didn't mention, is when you were talking about Acts 2, is when he says that they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching. He concludes that portion by also saying, and God was adding to their number day by day.
Right.
And what number is that? They're definitely calculating these people. They counted the 3,000. They added these people up.
Absolutely. Added to what? Yeah, added to the membership of the church.
So they definitely know, and I agree with you. So remind me the three. It's
church membership is described, church membership is implied, and church membership is assumed.
So let's just put ourselves in the shoes of somebody who has never been in a church that has membership, that they come to our church for the first time, and it's culture shock to them because they're just used to attending a church where there is no such thing as in or out. You just, if you're there, you're in. Um, what should be their expectation, or what would be some things they would see that are different? In other words, what are some things that people who attend our churches can't do unless they become members?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that they would notice is that there is a distinction between those who have committed themselves to the church and those who have not. And so personally, as a pastor, I want to be able to love every single person who walks in through my doors. I want to be able to share the gospel with them, especially if they are non-believers. But I have a specific a special obligation, a special responsibility to the members of my church, just like I have a special relationship with the children in my family, right? I love all the kids, that come to my church, but I have a special relationship, special responsibility to my own kids. And so I think they would see that in terms of things like service, things like church accountability. Those things would be only accessible in the context of being committed to the local church. So those are some sort of the more obvious distinctions. I think we don't have non-members serving in our church. Our people who are not members are not in our discipleship groups. We certainly pray for those who are not members, but we don't have that special relationship. I don't know if you get what I mean, that you have with those who are members.
Absolutely, certainly. And we would have the same setup here at our church at RGF. And I think one of the things that surprises people is that they feel, if they've come out of a situation where they are not used to membership, or they're not used to membership being well defined, they at first begin to consider it like a club. Like, well, I feel like this is too exclusive. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true in the sense that we are being exclusive, but I think it's a loving type of exclusion where we're identifying people that we want to especially love. I think a church membership is mostly a matter of love. And I think what we're saying is that, you're committing yourselves to the members here, and the members are committing themselves to you in a very special way. I don't think we would say that it's an exclusion to say like, oh, well, two people get married. Well, yeah, those two people in a sense are saying we have an exclusive relationship, right? And we wouldn't dispute that and say that that's unloving. That's just what marriage is. And same thing with church membership.
I think one of the things that people often experience who are moving from a church with minimal understanding of church membership, and then they come to our church or to North Shore, is they look at our process and they say, whoa, this is extreme. Like, this is a lot of stuff. Like at my former church, I literally just signed something and I was in, or I went to a class for 30 minutes and I was in. Or quite literally, there's two examples that I find absolutely bizarre. One of a church in Manhattan that I went to for the purpose of a high school graduation that was being held there from one of my students when I was a youth pastor. In the back of their pew, they had a card that said, if you put a $200 check in this and sign your name and give us your information, you can become a member for 1 year. And then we'll send you a thing to renew in a year, which is bizarre. And that's not what church membership is at all.
No, it's not.
And then there was another church here on the island where I met a young lady who told me she was teaching the membership class at her church, but she herself is not a member of the church. So there are people who come out of churches like that where there's a very different form of what membership is, and they come to churches like ours and they say, wow, this is extensive. I don't know why you guys go through all of this rigmarole to get us, what's the big deal here? Why do we need to listen to sermons and read things and write things and give you our testimony? Why do we need to do that? So why do we have such an extensive system in place?
Yeah, I think it's important that, we teach people, first of all, what the church is and what church membership is. And that's part of what our classes are all about, and the new membership class that we have at North Shore is about. We want them to know what are the benefits? Why should you join a church? So you want to know what you're doing before you get into anything. And secondly, if you're going to be part of a church and you're going to be committed to them, you're going to be covenanting with the members. Well, what does the church believe in? What are some of the expectations? What in the world is a church covenant? What are we covenanting to do together? So those are important things that have to be addressed. Whether it's in one class or in many classes, or whether at our church we have a new membership candidate process where you're sort of you have several months to listen to sermons, you keep on attending, you meet up with people, so you get kind of a taste of what membership is. I think that's important before you jump into anything as serious as church membership. And I think it does have to be serious. And I think if people saw the fruits of church membership, they would say, "Wow, I'm glad that we took this so seriously. I'm glad that the church took this so seriously."
There's an element of this process that is helpful to us as pastors, where we get to look carefully at what a person believes and what a person, if their life matches their testimony, we get to observe over a period of time, right? Which is really
Right.
helpful to us because, like you said, there are people for whom we are going to give an account, and before God, that is a big deal. And
Yeah.
when we look at somebody's testimony and we can see this person doesn't seem to have a credible testimony, their understanding of the gospel is a works-based faith, for example, we should not permit you into membership. One example is there's a man at our church who was previously at your church, who, when he was going through the membership process at your church, was told, listen, what you have said is that you understand the gospel very inaccurately. According to your testimony, you think that your attendance and activity in the church your whole life, it has saved you, and that hasn't saved you. And this person went home and was at first a little frustrated, but I think realized for the very first time that he wasn't actually a Christian, and then studied the word deeply, became a believer, trusted in the Lord, and through the process of being told, no, you can't become a member, it actually was the way in which he realized what a true Christian really is.
Yeah.
And so we get to make wiser choices as leaders in regards to who we're going to who it is that we actually say, yes, we agree with you, we think you're saved, because
Right.
we have this in place. So that's a huge part for us. And I think you're absolutely right in saying that people should look at this and say, this is loving for the church to have this process because it stabilizes us. It gives us a boundary line. It gives us comfort. We know that if we begin to step into sin, that these people are going to call us back to obedience. And in that regard, I want to ask you, what is the relationship between church discipline and membership? I know that you've already mentioned that to an extent, but if people don't have church membership, for example, what are some things that would make it more difficult to do church discipline and vice versa?
Yeah. I think, well, first of all, I think we should establish that church discipline is important. It's in the Bible. Um, there are churches who, not only do they not care about church membership, but they don't care about church discipline. But here's the thing: if you don't have church membership, I don't see how you can practice church discipline at all. You can't put someone outside of the church if they were never inside the church, or if you have no way of knowing who is inside of the church. You can't put them out. All anybody would ever do is, if there was any type of conflict, if there was any type of unrepentant sin, all you need to do is get up and walk to the church down the block. So you just couldn't discipline anyone if you don't have church membership.
Right. You can't say they're out if they weren't officially in, right?
Right.
What does the Lord's table have to do with this?
Oh, wow. Okay. Is Alex Duke going to be watching this? No, I'm just kidding. So I think that church membership, there is a link between church membership and the Lord's table. I do think that you need to be, the reason you ought to be a member of a church before you take the Lord's Supper is because the Bible calls us to examine ourselves, right? Each time we take the Lord's Supper. You don't want to take the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner. But here's the thing. If you don't have a church that's behind you that says, yeah, this person's profession is consistent with this person's life. And that's what church membership essentially does, right? It gives you that sort of assurance that you have from your elders, your leaders, and as well as the other members of your church. How does one know that they're not taking the Lord's Supper in an unworthy manner, right? If you're not living a life of unrepentant sin. And as a church that's administering the Lord's Supper, we have a responsibility at least to ask you and say, how do we know that you are living a life that is consistent with your profession? So I think one of the things that we practice at North Shore, is we practice what's called close communion, which means that you must be a member either here at North Shore or at another church, another Bible-believing church, in order to take the Lord's Supper.
Well, I think in terms of church membership here, there's a lot of people who have questions in regards to what if I'm not comfortable yet becoming a member? What if I need to take some time? What would you say to somebody who is just a little reticent in terms of church membership?
Well, I would say you definitely should take some time in getting to know the church. You shouldn't be hasty in making a decision like this, and you should be consistently attending a church regularly. I mean, we used to say at our church that you should at least 2 to 4 months consecutively to attend a church before you get to know what the church is really about. What's the church teaching like? What are the members like? Do they live in a way that's consistent with what the pastors are teaching? And are the pastors teaching in a way that's faithful to God's word? And so you do need to take some time in order to consider which church you are to join. But if you're at a church for 2 years, or if you're at a church for a year and a half, I think you ought to know if this church is really for you. So I would say that to that person to consider joining the church. Consider talking to one of the pastors of the church and asking them how you can start to begin the process of joining the church. Also to consider all the things that you're missing out on by not joining the church. I think all the one another commands in the Bible. How are you obeying those commands if you're not in a committed church membership, committed relationship with the church? I don't see how you can do that.
Well, brother, I really appreciate everything that you've shared with us today in regards to church membership and church discipline. I want to ask just a very broad question, totally disconnected perhaps from this, and that is, in closing, what is one thing that the Lord has been teaching you in recent days that has been a blessing to you, either from the Word or from your church, that has stuck with you during this tough season?
Yeah, I would say, and I want to tie it into what we're talking about, is that the benefits of church membership continue even during a pandemic. I can't say enough about how many people who I've committed to, and they have committed to me, who have, during a time like this, where everybody's suffering, everybody is in a weird time in their life, people have called me and told me that they love me, have been praying for me. The amount of letters that I've received, the amount of text messages, I don't see how this could have happened if we did not have that kind of committed relationship where you're reminded that person is someone that you have covenanted with, and that person is someone that you should love. Even if you don't get to see them for a few months, that person, you are members of one another, as Paul would say.